Welcome to Rock and Roll Fridays, a podcast on musical encounters and
Welcome
life.
to Rock and Roll Fridays. This is my first afternoon edition, so I'm happy to have Joe Clementi on today. And Joe is a creative at heart, as most of our guests are, and he is a photographer. He's my first photographer guest, so I'm so happy to welcome Joe to Rock and Roll Fridays.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Mike.
Awesome. So Joe, 25 plus years, 30 plus years of photography. How long have you been at it?
50.
50.
50
You
years.
look like you're 50.
50 years. I started shooting in 1971.
Wow.
When I was a senior in high school.
How did you get into photography?
I had an incredible art teacher. I attended Lenape High School in Medford, New Jersey, and I had Mrs. Ponchiello, Dorothy Ponchiello, was our art teacher, and she was just an incredible woman. So that's how.
Awesome. And it's so many people, like, you know, I mean, even famous artists go back to their teachers and when they were younger to motivate them and to point them in a creative direction.
Oh, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, absolutely.
What kind of got you hooked on photography? What was it about photography?
I think it was the combination of art and science to make images. That's what really got me involved in doing it. And you know, of course, I think part of it was as a creative. You know, I painted in high school. We worked in clay, and I just felt more comfortable with the camera as a tool to make images.
It's amazing, and I'm sure back in the day when you started, there was no digital imagery, right? You're probably shooting analog, the old Canon AE1, right? Like
I'm still shooting with Canons. It was kind of like my go-to camera. My first camera was a Nikon, so that's really how I started with it. But I switched over to Canon many years ago, and I still shoot with film most of the time, and I still shoot with Canons.
And I think, you know, and we could get into it, you know, I think with photography nowadays, with, you know, these things, right? It's a different world. Everyone's a photographer, everyone's a videographer, everyone's has the ability to filter and shoot and create, which I think is a positive thing. But there is an art and a skill to capturing an emotion, a feeling, a person, an experience. And definitely your art has been described as that. It's not just around taking pictures, it's about capturing people in action, in motion. And a lot of your work is in New York City. Can you talk about how you got to New York City and kind of the scene in the 70s, 80s, and then into the 90s that you shot?
Sure. I mean, I think like one of my first jobs that I shot was actually here in South Jersey, and it was for Epic Records. There was a concert at a band called Redbone was playing at the then Echelon Mall.
Oh wow!
Many years ago, and I think it was 1973. I was 19, and I met a character named Don Wright from Epic Records. And I was shooting some photos, and he had given me his card and said, "I'd really like to see the photos of the band." You know, and back then, like when you're talking about phones and cameras, like there weren't very many people with photography equipment there shooting.
Right.
So I, you know, developed the film. I brought it over to him. They bought a bunch of photos from me. They called me a few days later to shoot another job for them. It was they were releasing a record called "The Last Days of the Fillmore," and Bill Graham, the guy who owned Fillmore East and West, was going to be in Philadelphia, and if I could follow him around for the day shooting photographs. So, as a 19-year-old, it was a pretty big thing for me. But
you think?
yeah, it was an incredible kind of like, life-changing experience. And I learned a lot that day. I learned that if you just act like you know what you're doing, most people will perceive you as that. And so it was a fun day. I mean, we went to back in Philadelphia. They did several TV shows, McLean and Company, the Mike Douglas Show. There were several radio stations that we went to, and I was with them from like 8 a.m. in the morning to almost 10 o'clock at night.
And how was your experience with Bill Graham? How was
he was it was a great experience. I mean, he was a pretty tough, rough guy,
no nonsense, right?
Yes. And it was fun. It was my first time ever in a limousine. I'm sitting in the front, shooting into the back.
That's awesome.
It was a kick. And the pictures came out really, really great. There's a bunch of them on my Instagram page from back then. And so that's how I really got started at working professionally. And from then I went on to do several jobs for Epic Records in Philadelphia, Dr. Hook and the Medicine Band.
Yeah.
A woman named Cy Coltrane. She had a hit called I'm sorry, I can't even remember it now, but she had a hit in 1973, 1974 for them. And then I headed to New York City because I just felt like Philly I love Philadelphia. It's a great, great city, but I just felt there was more opportunity for me in New York City.
Right.
Yeah. And
did you continue to shoot musicians and in New York City as well, or?
Well, I kind of my very first, I met this photographer. His name was Sam Siegel, and Sam offered me a position working with him, and he had a studio at 47th and Broadway in the Palace Theater building. And most of his work was in the entertainment industry, whether it be movies, music. The very first job I did with Sam, and I was bringing the gear along, and we were working right across the street at the Uris Theater. It was Count Basie, Ella Fitzgerald, and Frank Sinatra.
Wow.
Right. And he was like one of these guys, like he was just a wonderful, wonderful man. Like he would never say like, hey, we're going to go shoot all these important people today. He would just go, we have a job. So we're going to be there at 6:30. We're going to set up and we're going to do some stuff. And, I'm down in the pit. Ella Fitzgerald comes on behind the Count Basie Orchestra. And I had never heard her before, to be honest. I mean, I had no clue who Ella Fitzgerald was.
Right.
And the voice was just so incredible. And, that was one of the first times that I left work and I went right to the record store.
Right.
And
You're like, I got to check out who this is.
Right. And that was the first time I did that, but it most certainly was not the last, so it was, but it was just a fun experience shooting that. And, and to see Frank Sinatra, who, as an Italian kid growing up, you lived with that in your home.
Right. I know. And how did you shoot? Were you shooting Frank Sinatra also during that?
Yeah, it was one of yes, one of Sam's accounts was a company called Salters and Roskin, and they represented Frank Sinatra. Actually, that's who we were there to shoot. We were there to shoot Frank Sinatra, and the other people just happened to be a bonus.
Right.
Yeah,
and when you were on these assignments, were you shooting them just as they were performing, or also more intimate type shots, or backstage, or what was
we kind of did both of them, Mike, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
We would shoot the performance, we would shoot some stuff, some scene setters behind the scenes, and even some things afterwards at a lot of the parties that the people had. And then we would develop the film and we would run it around to the newspapers. in the city and to the wire organizations.
Yeah. How was that experience and the relationship between photographer and artist, knowing that there's a photographer in the room? Like how did you establish those relationships? Because I assume you have to establish trust very quickly, or at least I'm not going to be in your way while I'm doing my job. Well, you know, you, Joe, or you know, you're doing your job.
Well, with somebody like Frank Sinatra, like there were specific things that we were told beforehand, you know,
Right.
that we needed to do, and most of that was just to be like a fly on the wall,
Right.
you know, and they were really great folks to work with, you know, but like that was just our MO with them, and with some people you could, you know, you can interact with them, but you know, you have to respect what your client asked you to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're there to do a job, obviously.
Yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned, it's funny, you mentioned, you know, Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra. Talk about music and bands that you shot that you were like, wow, no one knows these people and they're awesome, right? Or have you ever experienced that kind of, you know, these guys are going to be great someday?
Yeah, there was several that we kind of lucked into, and one of them was the Commodores. They were doing a showcase at the American Hotel on 57th Street. I guess it was probably late 70s, and just seeing them was they were just absolutely like incredible.
Right.
Yeah, they were incredible. I mean, a lot of bands, you know, like it really depends on what genre you were listening to. But like when you heard some bands that were like cross genres, like when we were at Felt Forum to shoot the band Chic, and I had never heard them before, and they were absolutely incredible. You know, I was more into rock and roll, and they were just and I wouldn't even say they were a disco band. I mean, because they were just a great R&B group.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so that was like, you know, one a big surprise for me.
And how did I mean, like every city, right? From, you know, in the 70s in New York City, it was disco, protest, grit, grungy type of city. How did you see your job, the music, the city change from 70s into 80s into 90s? Because I'm sure your images have shifted through the decades that you've shot artists and celebrities.
Well, in the 70s, you know, the city was like on verge of being bankrupt. You know, it was a pretty gritty place. I mean, there were a lot of things going on. We had the blackout, Son of Sam. At one point, there was a garbage strike. There was a transit strike.
Crime,
yeah,
lots of crime. Yeah,
a lot of crime. I myself, I really didn't, you know, like I was just enjoying being there. I was like a kid in a candy shop being in New York City. I was like one of these people. Like I lived initially on 66th Street and First Avenue. I would walk to work almost every day down to 47th Street and Broadway, and I could go back home. I can go and you could go a different way every single day and never see the same thing.
Yeah.
So, but the music scene was forever evolving in the city. There were great clubs. There was one around the corner on 29th Street when I moved down to 30th Street called The Dive. That was a pretty cool place. There were a lot of folks playing down there. We went to CBGB's. We went to the initial places, 8BC. There was a girl, Phoebe Legere. She was a pretty good pianist. One night we followed her from her lounge gig at 1 Fifth Avenue to 8BC. She was running back and forth from her lounge act to play with her rock band at 8BC.
Yeah.
We must have gone back and forth several times with her to do that. There was a woman called Marilyn, Marilyn and Movie Stars. They were playing at the Mud Club a lot. They were the house band at the Mud Club in the early 80s. That was an area of the city down on White Street that was, at night, there was just nothing there. Like people didn't live all over like they do today in Manhattan.
Right.
You
Right.
know, they lived in different places.
What are some of your favorite shots or favorite moments? You know, I know you, I mean, God, you've probably taken hundreds of thousands of photos, right, over your career.
Yeah.
Are there some that stand out that, you know, you're like, wow, I can't believe I was in this moment?
I had what I think one of the most unique evenings I had. I got to go to the Friars Club, which was I think on 54th Street, if I remember right, to shoot Dave Brubeck, Paul Desmond, and they were playing with Dave's sons on bass and piano. And again, that was like one of the nights that you're just like, oh my God, I can't even believe I'm here. We were in this really tiny little room watching those guys make incredible jazz.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they made incredible music. It was just so, you know, I was so excited, like to just to be there.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of opportunities like that, like where people would just call up and go like, hey, you need to go, can you go do this for me?
Right. Right.
You know, and
awesome.
It was always fun.
Well, I'm gonna have you shoot me someday, so I can add me to your repertoire of artists, maybe.
That would be fun. That would always be fun.
So, Joe, how can people see your work, and where can they find your work, and how can they hire you to shoot?
Well, I'm online. They can always find me. And they can just, you can give me a call, send me an email. I'm on Instagram. I currently have a show that's running there, and it ends this week, though, December 12th at Big Day Film Collective in Collingswood. And a big shout out to Jackie Neal for putting that together. That was a lot of fun for me.
That's
that
awesome.
was a lot of fun for me.
Everyone, check out Joe Clementi Photography, find his work. And Joe, this has been awesome and eye-opening. And I can't, I will definitely be sharing Joe's work, and everyone should check it out. So thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you, Mike. It was a pleasure.
Awesome.